Most people think deep thinkers are so smart. That's not what's actually happening. Deep thinkers don't think more because they're gifted. They think more because something, early on, made it unsafe not to. You've sat in a conversation, nodding along, while simultaneously running 3 parallel thoughts about what that person actually meant, what they're not saying, and whether your response will land right. You replay conversations from 2 weeks ago, not because you're paranoid, because your brain genuinely needs to understand what happened. You can be surrounded by people and feel completely alone in your own analysis. Not lonely, just operating at a frequency nobody else seems to be on. And when someone calls you too much or overthinking it, there's this flash of shame mixed with quiet certainty that you're not overthinking at all. You're just thinking. They're just not. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your mind works this way, where it actually comes from, and why the same pattern that makes you perceptive is also the one making you exhausted. There's a specific behavior that almost every deep thinker develops. It's invisible to everyone around them. Most deep thinkers don't even have a name for it. We'll come back to that. Deep thinking isn't a personality trait you were born with. It's a cognitive style that forms in response to an environment. Psychologists who study rumination and hypervigilance have found consistent patterns. People who grew up in unpredictable environments, emotionally inconsistent households, or situations where they had to read the room to stay safe. These people develop elevated pattern recognition. The brain learns. Information is protection. If you could predict what was coming, you could prepare for it. And preparing for it meant you didn't get blindsided. So your mind trained itself to go deeper, to look for subtext, to ask why, to sit with complexity long after other people moved on. That was adaptive. That was intelligent. That was survival. You probably recognize some of these. You process things slowly but deeply. Someone can tell you something and you'll respond fine in the moment, then lie awake at 2 a.m., understanding what they actually meant. You notice inconsistencies other people miss. Someone says they're fine. You file 3 pieces of behavioral evidence that suggest they're not. You hold a lot of other people's emotional weight, not because they asked, but because you picked it up before they knew they were dropping it. You struggle to explain your thinking because it's layered. By the time you get to your conclusion, you've passed through 7 steps the other person hasn't taken, and you don't know which one to start with. You find surface-level conversation genuinely draining, not because you're antisocial, because your mind keeps reaching for depth and hitting a ceiling. Here's where the reframe happens. The same neural pathways that make you perceptive, the ones that let you read between the lines, feel the emotional temperature of a room, and anticipate what's coming before it arrives, those pathways don't switch off. You took them home from childhood, they're still running. So while someone else is watching a movie, you're analyzing the character's attachment style. While someone else hears a comment, you heard the 4 possible meanings underneath it. While someone else sleeps, you're reconstructing a conversation from last Tuesday, looking for the part you missed. What protected you then is exhausting you now. Not because you're broken, because the threat is gone and the system is still scanning. Here's the hidden mechanism most people never get shown. The brain doesn't develop deep thinking in response to complexity. It develops it in response to emotional unpredictability. Specifically, when the people around you as a child were inconsistent, when love was conditional, or when you had to work to understand what someone needed in order to keep the peace, your nervous system assigned enormous value to understanding people. Getting it wrong had consequences. Getting it right brought safety. So your brain built a very sophisticated people-reading, pattern-finding, meaning-making engine. And now, decades later, you apply that engine to everything. Arguments with friends, offhand comments from co-workers, your own thoughts, which you then analyze, and then analyze the analysis of. It's not overthinking. It's an overdeveloped threat detection system running in a world that's mostly not threatening anymore. You weren't difficult. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't dramatic for needing to understand things deeply. You were responding rationally and intelligently to the information your environment gave you. Your brain drew the correct conclusion. Depth is protection. The problem isn't the tool. The tool works. The problem is that you never got the manual that said when to put it down. Nobody told you that one day you'd live in an environment where you don't have to understand everything to be safe, where you're allowed to not know yet, where sitting with ambiguity doesn't mean something bad is coming. That part wasn't taught, so your mind kept going. This is the part where other videos tell you to journal, meditate, and slow down your thoughts. That's not wrong, but it's incomplete. The actual shift for deep thinkers isn't learning to think less. It's learning to trust your environment enough to let some things be unresolved. Because the compulsive need to understand, to analyze, to find the final meaning of something, that's not an intellectual habit. It's an anxiety response wearing an intellectual costume. When you notice yourself spinning on something, the question isn't, what does this mean? The question is, what am I afraid will happen if I don't figure this out? That question leads somewhere real. Not to an answer, to a pattern. And seeing the pattern is what actually reduces its grip. You don't think your way out of this. You feel your way to the origin of it. Now, the behavior I mentioned at the start. The one almost every deep thinker carries without naming it. It's this. You hold yourself to a standard of self-understanding that you never apply to anyone else. You forgive other people for being contradictory, complicated, hard to read. You give them context, history, nuance. But when you catch yourself being contradictory, or when you can't fully explain why you feel something, there's this quiet internal verdict. You should know better. You've spent your whole life developing this instrument for understanding people. And somewhere along the way, you turned it on yourself and expected perfection. That's the hidden cost. Not the thinking, the judgment that lives inside it. Deep thinking is not a flaw dressed up as a strength. It's a genuinely rare cognitive capacity that came at a price you didn't choose to pay. The goal isn't to think less. The goal is to stop treating every unresolved thought like a threat, to let some things be incomplete, to give yourself the same layered, generous interpretation you've been quietly extending to everyone else your whole life. Your mind went deep because it had to. Now you get to decide where it goes next.